I'm not working this week. I'm away from work. I'm on the road, seeing some friends, doing some things. And the cheapest rental car I could find was a Tesla from Hertz. Right? It's the cheapest one. It's cheaper than a compact. It came up, and I think that Hertz probably has some contract with Tesla, and they probably got some federal kickbacks to where it profits them to have Teslas. And that's a smart thing. It's a smart thing with me because I was like, oh, Tesla. Well, I got to drive one, see all the hype is what all the hype's about. And it's a Model 3. And I believe Josh has driven one in the past too. And I was real skeptical. But man, I like I've been telling you guys, if it was practical and I could afford it, I'd drive a Tesla, man. They're freaking cool. I mean, it's
Well,
like driving
especially
a little
around
sports
town.
car. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I tell
Yeah.
my wife, if I'm like, especially, you guys have been in my town. It's like, dude, everything's within 2 miles. So for, around town driving, dude, why not? I'm not leaving the state in that bad boy, but, I'll go pick up groceries. But like you said, man, I can't spend $70,000 on a grocery getter. You know what I mean? That just isn't
Yeah.
going to happen.
Well, and also I'll never rent one again because Josh, like you were saying, it's when you rent, you have to return it full, right? And they cap it out at 80% battery charge. And it's like you got to return it for at what it was at. Mine was at 77%. So I went to charge it last night. I went from 77 down to like 63. Took about, I don't know, 17 minutes to charge up to 80. But I'm like, man, if I'm down around 30% and I got to charge that thing back up to 80, that's an hour and a half I'm going to be sitting there waiting for it to charge before I take it back to the rental car place. It's like gas,
Yeah. And that's just a charge. If you get there and you've got to wait on a charger, tack that time on, because when I had one, as a rental, bro, I just sit there. I waited probably a good 30 something minutes just to get on the charger.
So
And
what do
then
they
it was
charge you if
another,
you don't return it at 80? What's the cost?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's something ridiculous.
It's an
like
hourly rate. It's an hourly rate, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah. So I went ahead and came out of pocket and, I paid $35 to return it at anything over 10%, just in case. I'll eat that cost. But yeah,
They probably plugged into a house charger too. Like, hey man, it took 2.5 days to charge this thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, because the rate if you return it, and it's not at least back where it was when they gave it to you, it's like the gas, they're like, oh, that's gonna cost you $5 a gallon, for them to put gas in it. So yeah, I saw the rate when I got it. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was exorbitant.
And it's inconvenient, right? I mean, it's just easy. If you're going to charge me for that, then I would rather just put in gas because I can stop at the gas station, take my 3 minutes, put the gas in, and just call it a day.
Yep.
It's just not convenient.
And have you driven one, Roger?
I have not. I don't think so.
Okay.
If I have, it's been like for a short period of time. A little while ago.
Tell me, Josh. I mean, I had a couple of buddies in there with me yesterday, and I was like, "Watch this, ready?" And I put it down to the floor, and buddy, that thing's got some. It's a sports car.
No it's joke. Instant torque.
I mean, their heads.
Yeah, it's instant torque.
Yeah. It's because all that torque is going straight to the tires.
Yeah, theoretical, unlimited.
Yeah, it's when I had it, I got it out on the interstate and was like, okay, let's see, let's just see what this thing can do. Man, when I went to go pass somebody, no problem whatsoever. Like that thing will move.
I may do a little debt driving tomorrow night, and see, because I think I said this on the podcast before. I've driven a few cars in my day. We've been to a few driving courses where they teach you how to handle a car and things like that. And I've only driven one car. I haven't driven a whole lot of high performance automobiles. I'll tell you that right now. Well, now I've driven two. The first car I drove where the car had more to offer than I had to give it. So the car had more. The car exceeded my capabilities. Was an Infiniti QX35 or whatever it was, that little hatchback looking thing. That thing was unbelievable. And then this Tesla. I mean, this car, its capabilities exceed mine. That's all there is to it. It's a high performance automobile. It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, right. They are nice. They are super nice. I like the interior on it. Everything is clean, slick. There's really no wasted space in that vehicle. But dude, I can't pay $65,000 for a little run around town car.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't do it.
It's not practical. Not
No.
in the areas we live in. It's not practical.
No.
Well, especially for long term. And I think this is the problem you're going to start running into. I read an article yesterday. This guy bought a Tesla, and he's talking about just overall maintenance and things and little things. He was like, hey, the car's heavier, your tires wear out faster. He's like, I'm on my third set of tires and I'm at 70,000 miles, this and that, or whatever. And I didn't know this. I don't know how true this is. I haven't looked it up, but he's like, basically, you get 130,000 miles on the car because of the battery capacity and this and that. Now, you can go back and I'm sure pay whatever, $25,000 for a new battery or whatever. But from what this article was stating, that 130K is kind of like what you're capped at. That's where you're at without doing some type of overhaul or rebuild. And so now what happens in 4, 5, 6 years, when you have all these Teslas, Volts, Prius, this and that. I mean, I guess you've got lithium batteries, and it's not like you can take that thing to a junkyard and just dump it, right? I mean, What do you do with this stuff? I mean, I'm assuming they can recycle some of it, but how much can they really recycle? And then, it's like, hey, don't get me wrong, there are people that can't afford it, but, kind of like with my truck, and I know Josh drove, his truck forever to much beyond his AC, not working forever. But it's like, hey, a lot of us try to keep our vehicles 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years or until the wheels fall off that thing. So, I don't know too many average Americans that can go out there and kick out another 65, 70, 75, 80 grand for a vehicle every, 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah. No, I mean, dude, we grew up like you kept a vehicle until it just wouldn't go anymore. And, that's kind of the way I've tried to be now, just because, dude, I hate having a car note. And, get that thing paid off. And as long as it gets me from A to B, I really don't care. I mean, my vehicle now does have AC, Roger, so you'll be happy.
See, that's Josh's. That was good, man. That was Josh's game plan. So, Luke, we're back in Maryland. It's like July. He's like, let's go get some Chick-fil-A or something, which I should have known right then and there not to go with him. We get in his truck, and we get down to the end of the parking lot right there. And I'm like, hey, man, you cut on the AC, and he rolls the window down. Like, what are you doing? He's like, oh yeah, man, AC's been out for like 18 months. I'm like, are you serious? So we sit there and sweat. And I think for the next like 5 years that we were there together, I drove to lunch whenever we went to go eat. So well played, Josh. Well played.
Yeah. Dude, you know how expensive it is to get an air conditioner fixed in a vehicle?
But you should have saved that money with everybody else driving for lunch for gas. You had enough money saved up to buy a new AC.
Bro, that went to other stuff.
So real quick, I know, and it's not actually, I shouldn't say real quick. It's not going to be real quick. So obviously to our listeners and viewers out there, or to our viewers, to our listeners can't see and don't give a crap. 2 of us are in hotels. So hopefully our connection and connectivity stays stable, but somebody's got to do God's work out here. We got a comment on Facebook. I don't know if you guys saw this today or not. So I'm going to read it and I'll throw it to both of you to get your opinions on it. So it was from David. And I actually just replied, hey, we'll address this during the episode. It came today, and so we're recording tonight, and we'll address it. I won't give his last name. Those are on the page can see it or whatever. But so David writes, and bear with me here. I got to listen. I got to read this thing. Just listen to the latest podcast, and as usual, contained a lot of intelligent conversation on a number of issues. Talking about the one you guys did by yourself, so good job. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around one in particular that was mentioned: reparations for Black Americans. I originally thought it was an insane idea, but I've recently read some things that have me questioning the equity and necessity of the concept, mainly around the argument of generational wealth. Had slaves been paid for their work instead of having it forced upon them, they may have been able to pass that wealth to their children and families, eventually be able to provide a general wealth to their heirs. That was undoubtedly denied of them or to them. The recent vote by San Francisco Reparations Committee to advise a $5 million payment to each person is insane and unaffordable, but I'm stuck on both the should we do this as well as the how and how much. And am interested in your guys' insight. I still think it's a bad idea, but I think some of the point the other side is trying to make. I think I see some of the point the other side is trying to make. So I'll throw it over to Josh first, kind of give some of your thoughts on his comment and his question.
Yeah, so I saw Dave's comment, and Dave, definitely appreciate you hitting us up on social media. We always ask folks to do that, and you did just that. So I simply can't wrap my head around it for a number of reasons, and I'm sure we'll probably go around the horn a couple times on this. But the biggest reason right now is who pays for that, right? Why would we force people today who, and unless they're cryogenically frozen and we're going to bring them back to life, there's there's no one that is owned slaves alive today. No one who is alive today has ever been a slave. And so why should I pay for the sins of my father, so to speak? Right? Does that make sense? And also, what about how far are we going? How far down the rabbit hole are we going to go? Are Native Americans, are the ancestors of the Native American tribes who own slaves? Are they going to have to pay reparations as well? Because there was a number of Native American tribes that own slaves, specifically the Cherokee being one of them. And that's well documented. So are they going to be forced to pay reparations? Are the people who utilize the Irish as indentured servants, which is basically a form of slavery, are they going to have to pay reparations down the line? I mean, like, how far does, so we go back to how far down the line do we go, and how far into that rabbit hole do we go? I think if California turned around and gave some property that's worth a pretty penny back to the original family that owned it, way back when, but it was already state property, that they turned around and gave to the family, the descendants of the family that owned it. I guess how much would be enough, and how do you work that out, and how far down the rabbit hole do you go? That would be my initial thoughts on it. And I have to dig into it a little bit. Luke, what are yours?
I don't see how it's workable. He said he's stuck on should we do it and how. I don't trust the government to do just about anything, right? But again, on the other hand, if California wants to do it, well, I'm not a resident of California, so they could hold a vote on it or whatever. But I do think it does need to be put up to a vote. I didn't go to Harvard like David's profile says, so I forget words sometime. A referendum, that's the one I had to search for it for a second. So he's probably listening to us like, oh, these peasants talking. If they only had a Harvard degree, they'd be able to figure this out. I'm joking with you, Dave. But if California wants to do it, first of all, fine. But there's a number of problems with that. If it's going to be done, it needs to be done justly, correct? So there's a lot of factors we've got to consider. Like Josh said, going down the rabbit hole. You've got to determine, first of all, okay, Black Americans. Okay, well, is every single Black American a descendant of slaves? Well, no. Probably the majority, I guess. I don't know. I have to dig into that, but I guarantee there's a lot of. Well, hell, one of my good gym buddies is a Nigerian doctor. He's an obstetrician, and super great guy, but he's from Nigeria. He's not descended from slaves. He immigrated from Nigeria, and so it's like you can't just say Black Americans. First of all, it has to be descended from slaves in order if it's going to be done right. Okay, and I know that the sociologists may argue with me on that. Well, it's systemic racism, and that's the beginnings of that were slavery and so on and so forth. But first of all, you got to do a genealogy and make sure that they're descended from slaves. If we're going to go with the equity argument that Dave is using. Now, Dave says, and I am not sharpshooting Dave. I'm just giving my opinion on this. He said, now, may have been able, instead of having to own it, they may have been able to pass that wealth to their children and families eventually, and eventually be able to provide a generational wealth to theirs. Okay, I mean, that possibly, but may have been. Are we to assume that every one of them would have? If they would have been paid similar to an indentured servant, which weren't paid, but they were incurred a debt. They worked off their debt for pennies on the dollar as far as time is concerned. And it's basically slavery. It's not chattel slavery, but it is slavery. Does that mean every one of them would have had generational wealth? No, it doesn't. So, but we're going to treat them all equally as if they would have. and all of a sudden, you've got X amount of millions of Black Americans in California who are overnight millionaires. I don't. I would have to deconstruct that and look at it logically. But to me, just on the surface, prima facie, that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem equitable, if you will. It doesn't seem realistic. And as long as we're addressing that injustice, we'd have to address a lot of different types of injustice, as Josh was getting into. What about the Chinese working on the railroads? Those Chinamen, they weren't. They missed out on a lot of generational wealth with David's point. And it's not his argument. He's undecided. So we're not. Again, we're not shooting him all up or anything. I'm just saying these things that I'm considering when we're talking about reparations. I don't see it done right. I don't think the federal government should do it, because who's going to pay for it? Well, as Josh was alluding to or may have said outright, the taxpayer's going to pay for it. And if I'm paying for that, it needs to be done right. If it's going to be done at all, he's got some good points. I mean, generational wealth and all that stuff. But Roger, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think both of you guys hit it on the head. And just a caveat, he did say at the end, I still think it's a bad idea, but he sees some of the point the other side is trying to make, what I think most of us are like that. Like, I understand points that people are trying to make. I may be even able to see some of that perspective. But, like Josh said, hey, where does it stop? And then, the main thing is, and I'm not even looking at the how and how much. That's not the issue. It's whether you should or shouldn't do it. And what you're assuming is the same thing that you said, is that, well, everybody would pass down generational wealth. Well, I tell you this, I mean, I don't think I had any slavery in my family as far as my family being slaves. I mean, who knows? But I didn't get any generational wealth. Josh, did you get any generational wealth? How about you, Luke? You get any generational wealth?
Not much.
So I think when you look at generational wealth, one, nothing is guaranteed to anybody. And a lot of that, there's some luck that comes into that. There's some air quote strategery that comes into that to make sure, money's made and passed down or what have you. But nobody's guaranteed any generational wealth, no matter how much money you make. What's that, Josh?
So here's another question for this. Who would be responsible for payment of ancestors of people who were enslaved before the American Revolution? Because they weren't American citizens and they weren't enslaved by Americans. Right. So who's accountable for them?
Who's accountable for who captured them in Africa and sold them to slave traders also? That was another note I forgot to say. It's like, how far back are we taking this? Are we going all the way back to the root? Does a citizen of Sierra Leone or Niger or Nigeria, do they have to pay as well because their ancestors, took over this tribe and, the cost of defeat back then was sold into slavery? How far back are we taking this,
Yeah. So think about the Haitians that lived in Louisiana prior to the Louisiana Purchase. Is France responsible for paying them out? If indeed they potentially became slaves. I mean, they were Americans and they were descendants of slaves, but they weren't slaves themselves and they weren't enslaved by Americans. So again, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think, mainly because the sins of the father are not the sins of the son. And, for the reasons that you and Luke pointed out. But I also think it's a terrible idea because the federal government would be in charge of, ensuring that this works. And the American government is only good at two things: pointing a gun at people and spending your money. That's it. Everything else they basically suck at. So I just don't I don't see how it's workable.
And I would guess there's a very small percentage of, well, one, you'd have to define generational wealth, right? What is that amount? What does that mean? But I'd also have to say there's probably a very small percentage of folks who actually inherit, quote unquote, generational wealth, whatever that number is. Does that mean a house? Does that mean property? What does that mean? How do you define that? Is that a specific amount of money? But I think what we do, because, you can't go back to the beginning of time and pay out reparations. One, I do like Luke's idea. Hey, man, that's up to the state of California. I become more and more of a fan of, hey, man, that's up to the voters of that state because I don't live there. And if those taxpayers want to pay to do that, that's on them. They can pay everything to everybody. I mean, that's the state. But, I think what we do as a whole, the federal government, the state governments, local governments, the whole point to this is equality versus equity. We have to ensure, us and our government ensure that everybody has the same opportunities. Unlike Bernie Sanders, which I don't know if you saw that or not, when they asked him the difference between equality and equity. So this is the whole thing. They asked him the difference between equality and equity, and he didn't know the difference. He was like, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. You have to play that clip. So unlike him, we know the difference between equality and equity. And so for, at least for me, it's like, hey, every American deserves an equal opportunity at success. That's what you owe them. Because we can't go back on an individual basis. One, you can't assume that everybody's going to have generational wealth. How do you define that? And you can't go back and pay reparations for every wrong that the federal government's ever done to all of us or our families, because you'd be broke anyway, right? But at the same time, if the state of California, those voters want to pay that money out, that's them. That's their state tax dollars.
So a couple of things. I think that a good portion of the government is against generational wealth. It bounces back and forth between parties, but I'd say mainly the Democrat Party, the death tax and all that stuff is against generational wealth.
Yeah.
So, if the argument is about generational wealth and whether someone was able to pass it on or not, you'd also have to, there are a lot of factors you have to look at here, which leads me. So if there was a tax system in place that basically was prohibitive of generational wealth, do we go back and right that wrong as well? Or is that one okay? Because the issue is not about generational wealth. I don't think they try to make a point. The issue is about slavery. Okay. But here's my question for you guys. Josh just typed, Cato Institute reported that 70% of today's millionaires did not inherit their wealth. That's a lot. Okay. Millionaires. All right, and he also typed, are we going to pay Japanese Americans who were placed in internment camps in World War II? I would be, that's a tough one, right? I don't know the entire history of that. That definitely didn't go on as long as slavery did. But I guess my question, I guess I'll kick it to Josh. So let me see if I can frame
Well, hold on real quick, Luke, before you go to your question, because I don't want to break your train of thought too much. But this is the problem right here, because you get politicians that just throw out some crap, reparations, let's vote on it. And then you got guys like David, like, okay, well, let's break this thing down. How do you do this? How do you determine this? How much should we? Man, those politicians haven't gone beyond the first, stinking question. And that's part of the problem. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, I think we can all three agree right now that I would say an entire generation after the slaves were free, maybe two, were at a significant disadvantage. Okay. I mean, I think that would be hard to argue that was not the case. That said, again, my parents didn't inherit generational wealth. I mean, they were, they had good families and everything that raised them, right? But it's easier for some people to get ahead in this world than others. There's 100, 1,000 different variables that will determine that. Intelligence is one of those, right? Some people just aren't born as intelligent as others. Some people aren't born as good looking as others. Josh will tell you that. You take that any way you want. But not everybody is on an even playing field. So, I think that, recently freed slaves, generation or two, I don't know about three, I'm not sure. It's the question I have for you, Josh. At what point, keeping in mind that it's different. Everyone is different, but there are dumb people that make money. Okay, there are dumb people that are very successful. There are very dumb millionaires. There are very, very dumb politicians. At what point after the slaves were free was it an even playing field, in your opinion? Where I will readily admit, Jim Crow laws, stuff like that, it was harder for Black Americans to make money through history. It was harder, but there was also a Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Where you had the massacre there, and it was an awful thing. But it wasn't impossible. I'm just saying, at what point was there a somewhat even playing field, do you think, in our nation's history after the slaves were freed? Boy, we're getting into, some sensitive stuff here. If some people listen to this, they'd be like, that's the most racist podcast I ever heard in my life. But we're truly trying to break it down somewhat logically.
No, we're not racist because we have a minority on the show. So
kind of, yeah.
So the playing field was evened on July 2nd, 1964, when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. That's when the playing field became even. So I agree. Like, Jim Crow laws were deplorable, and they absolutely placed, African American at a disadvantage for a long time. And you had cases like Plessy v. Ferguson that stood for a very long time. And that's why, when people are like, well, that, this, like Roe v. Wade, they're like, oh, well, this has stood for, X number of decades. And so it should be law. It's like, okay, well, there's some pretty bad cases out there that stood for a very long time. Not that doesn't make them just because they've been on the books for a long time. So I would say once the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, the playing field evened out. Now, one could argue that the racism still persisted in the country in a lot of places, and yes, but you're always going to have that. You're always going to have racism in every country that you go to because we're humans, and humans are fallible. Uh, Once you had affirmative action come along, now who's at a disadvantage? If me and Roger get the same marks on a test, well, Roger's going to get the spot. Why? Because he's a minority. So, yeah, no, I think that's when the playing field evened out, when when we abolished Jim Crow laws as they should have been uh, in 1964. To answer your question,
Fair enough. Fair enough. Any
So
more
basically,
thoughts,
two
Roger?
generations. Then, I mean, to go back to Luke's, question, how long is it? 2 generations or 3 generations? Defined as 25 to 30 years. So you figure roughly 2 generations, maybe a little, just short, or maybe just a little bit over.
yeah,
So
and you could even argue that it took a generation after that to overcome, the previous issues, with the previous Jim Crow laws and stuff like that. Let's just say that it took a generation to overcome that. You're still another generation away from that, removed from that, and Luke talked about it. You bring up Chuck, and there is so much opportunity today that no one in the United States can come back and say I'm oppressed. You just can't. You're full of shit. You're 100% full of shit when you do. And the generational wealth thing, you know, I do very well. We all do very well. And I imagine that we do a lot better, right now than our parents did at, the age we are right now. I mean, I grew up on a dirt road, bro. I thought my neighbor was rich as hell because he had actual hot dog buns and hamburger buns, right? It just wasn't a loaf of bread. Like that was our hot dog bun. That was toast. That was hot dog buns. That was French toast. That was hamburger buns. And they had separate dinner napkins and not paper towels. I was like, these they won the lottery. Like they are rich
Josh
as
is like,
shit.
they got custom bread pieces for their hot dogs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, when people say, "Well, I can't make it," the system's holding me down. No, it's not. That's an excuse. That is a 100% excuse, and those people automatically dismiss them.
Yeah.
Well,
Right
and
out of
that's
the
the
gate.
problem, right? I think looking at it through your eyes, because I see it the same way as, and all of us have kids, young adults and some teens, older kids. The opportunity is there. I mean, that's the problem, And obviously, if I grew up in the 60s or 70s, and I think Josh hit on the head, you could see it like right after the 60s. Obviously, there's going to take some time to catch up, truly hit that, equality and push forward. But, looking at it from the time that I was a kid to now and watching what my kids have gone through, there's just too much opportunity out there. I mean, I sat there and watched my daughter work, I've said this before, she worked 3 part-time jobs, got straight A's in high school so she'd get a scholarship to go to college, and worked her ass off so she could afford a car payment and gas money and all the entertainment money and all that other stuff. So, nobody gave her anything. She went out there and applied for the same stuff that everybody else did. And I tell you this, as a white woman, she didn't get a whole lot. Nobody gave her a scholarship for being a white woman. Okay, it didn't happen that way. She busted her ass. It was those straight A's. And I believe this, even as a kid going through high school, I just know that today, no matter what your ethnicity is, whatever your background is, you go through high school, you get straight A's or something close to that, you will go to college and not pay, you'll pay very little, if anything. Now, you may not go to
Well,
Harvard. You may not go to
Say that
Yale,
again.
but you're going to go
Say
to
that again.
college.
Can you say
If
that
you
again?
go through, if you go through high school and you get straight A's or something close to that, you will go to college and pay very little, if anything.
Oh,
I
yeah.
firmly
That
believe that.
wasn't my experience. That wasn't our experience with our kids. Maybe that's Texas. Maybe that's the schools they applied to. But my daughter got the ROTC scholarship, and first year, my Hazelwood took care of her first year, and my stepson, I think he's made one B in his entire career. He's going to graduate, this college, of course. He's going to graduate top 7% now in Texas Tech. So he makes really high marks. He always made really high marks in school. Uh, but he didn't get many scholarship offers to the schools. Okay. To your point, okay, to the schools that he wanted to go to. Unfortunately, I had the Hazelwood Act. It may not have. This may have been different if we had no money at all. It's like, bro, you're going to Tarleton State, you're going to Angelo State, you're going to
Right.
a smaller school where they're hungry for kids who make these kind of grades, so you can get your scholarship. That's where you're going to go. You're not going to go to the school that you want to go to. But fortunately, because of the Hazelwood Act, he was able to go to Texas Tech, but all he got was the presidential scholarship for all that stuff. Now, yeah, so okay, I agree with you. I was just going at it from
So
like,
how
okay,
so
the
how many
big,
third party scholarships? And part of this may be because of what he already had. And again, maybe you don't go to Texas Tech, maybe you end up going to a local college. But I knew a lot of like what my daughter
oh
got
yeah,
was just, hey, VA writing an essay scholarship. Here's $1,000.
yes,
there's a lot of that stuff that
100%,
she went out and sought out and found.
yes,
Not necessarily
absolutely,
just through the school.
and she, yeah, 100%, and and now this has turned into a college thing. Listen up, Josh. Pay attention to this part because Josh is about to feel the pain, brother. I preach this to the kids. It's like it's not if you want to go to the school you want to go to, and I'm not even talking about Harvard. I'm not talking about Stanford or Pepperdine or anything like that. I'm talking about like a state school, like there's Arizona State, Texas Tech, UT, just the schools that are huge. Good grades aren't enough. You have to get the big scholarships, right? You have to play multiple sports. You have to do community service. There has to be, especially as a white male, there has to be something about you that stands out. Travel overseas. Both the kids got to, well, stepson got to put on his resume that he worked for the State Department overseas. That's kind of a cool thing. All these things they have to a job. The things that make you a well-rounded person, not just good grades, because so many kids nowadays make good grades. They do in certain areas of the country, like North Dallas. Man, all those kids are busting their ass making grades, because it's a competition thing. But I just, if they want to go to the school they want to go to, the cool school, it's more than just grades. And my nephew said one of the greatest things ever, and I'll kick it to Josh for his thoughts on paying for school and scholarships and stuff like that. Well, my nephew, he got his engineering degree, civil engineering from one of the Nebraska schools, not the big one, but one of the University of Nebraska satellite schools, and made good grades in his senior year. Summer between his junior and senior year, he went and did a fellowship or whatever internship at some engineering place in Chicago. Right, worked real hard. He's a personable kid. They liked him. And they said, come back next summer for another internship and we may give you a job. He goes back, does another internship with an undergrad in civil engineering, and they hire him after a few months after graduation. This kid started out, imagine this. You just graduated college, you're 22 years old. You were starting out at about $70,000 a year, plus a percentage of commission on the projects you complete. He builds this little indoor skydiving things. He's a project manager for those.
Gotcha.
So he's got it made. And you know what he said to my kids? He goes, no one ever in this whole process asked me what my GPA was. Ever. No one asked me. Not even when I applied for the internship. So GPA, is it important? I guess. But, it's that practical experience. It's that, go
Well,
out.
and I agree with that. But I think when you start talking about going to the college you want to go to versus I'm just talking about getting post-secondary education, it's a different ball of wax,
Yeah.
because, my boys start off at the community college down here and he could have paid that tuition working at McDonald's. I mean, it's not expensive. And I get it. It's different place to place, more expensive here in California, New York, or whatever. I just tell you from where he was at, and that's where he started. His first 2 years there. Now he's at ASU. But that, on the broader scale, getting, and you're right, that's only half of it, right? They get you in. That's all that does. You still have to graduate. And then, like him, I've never been asked what my GPA was when I want to go get a job in the Army or anything. Nobody cares, right?
Who wants to be that douchebag? We've all run into them that, they're in the professional workforce. It's been a while since I've been this age, but, we saw it in the Army. You got those specialists who got their college degree and they want to tell everybody in the platoon what their GPA was. It's like, bro, you're standing in formation with me. We're about to do a passing review. Why don't you shut your mouth? Nobody cares. Josh, I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to kick it to you. And it's kind of a heartfelt thing. It's kind of not heartfelt, but it's emotional thing. It meant a lot to me. And it's what Roger was saying. So my daughter figured out halfway through her sophomore year, holy cow, there's all this money out there that I can apply for. These scholarships, these independent scholarships. And she was in ROTC and she wrote an essay and she got $1,500 scholarship, just a check cut to her because she won this contest because of the essay. And the essay was about me in my service and what that meant to her. And that felt really good. Good on her. Without me, she wouldn't have had that $1,500. But yeah,
so she should
there's
be thanking
all
you.
this money. Yeah, exactly. But there's all this money out there. So Josh, you probably already researched this and looked into it, but there's so many of these little penny ante things that they can apply for and not tell you. And they have their little $2,000 squirreled away and they're still asking you for $20 because they got to get some pens and pencils and notebooks. So beware.
Yeah, no, believe me. So our oldest is, she graduates this summer. But the local community college here though does a scholarship to where if you take classes with them your junior and senior year and you maintain a certain GPA, then once you graduate high school you can come finish up your 2-year degree for free with them. So, and it's right down the road. It's not that far. So, that's what she's going to do. And then she'll go on to, a 4-year university for 2 years to finish up her bachelor's. And then we told our other daughters, hey, if you want us to help you and you want us to, to kick in so you can graduate, with no student loan debt, like this is the path you will take unless you get a scholarship, outright, which are, which you could very well happen academic wise, because all our kids are way smarter than I ever was. They've been at the point for a while now to where I can't help them with math homework anymore. Actually, who am I bullshitting? They passed that point in like 4th grade. But when we're talking about college admissions, and kind of going back to the whole, who has an advantage and who doesn't, use Roger as an example. And remember, you got UNC. The Supreme Court is, arguing these now about affirmative action, especially with UNC and Harvard specifically using race-based admissions, right? So again, I'll just kind of close that piece out. The playing field was leveled a long time ago, and then I kind of typed into the comments when the United States elected Barack Obama, by both the electoral and popular vote twice. I think that sent a message to where, hey, you can, if you want it, you can go after it and you can get it. That's just so. Any excuses after that? That's exactly what they are. They're nothing more than excuses.
So I'm going to tell you guys something that I heard this week, and I'm probably way behind the times on this, and you guys have probably already heard about it. But we don't praise the DOD and how they treat soldiers and how they develop them. We don't praise them very often. The DOD does some things well. The military does some things well. But when it comes to soldiers leaving the service, there's a system in place. But I personally believe for years the system was lacking. It's getting better. But I heard of this program, Roger, that I think is one of the best things I've ever heard, ever, from the DOD. So when someone's going to separate from any one of the services, they offer a program now that you can apply to, where you put your name in, you basically put a resume in, and while you're on terminal leave, you will go intern for a company. Paid, it's not even paid internship; it's free. The armies or Marines or whoever's still paying you. Skill Bridge. See, Josh has heard of it. I couldn't remember the name of it, and it's kind of understood that that company will, if you don't screw up, they're going to hire you when you're out. When your date hits, boom, now you're working for X, Y, or Z. And it was our buddy, and I know he has time to listen, but I don't know if he does. Jeremy, I don't know if he does, but he's the one that brought this up, and I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard of in my life. And he brought up a specific person who got an internship with actually Department of Energy, and he's probably going to walk into a great job. It's like, finally, somebody had a good idea that benefits everyone. But I guarantee you, soldiers at least, the vast majority aren't taking advantage of this. And then they're going to moan and whine and say, the Army set me up for failure and all this stuff. And the smart ones are taking advantage of it. And apparently, I mean, there's companies lining up for this program. Because at the very least, you're going to get, anywhere from a month to 6 months of free work out of these people, and everybody knows, a lot of companies like to hire veterans. Hell, even Microsoft has a very competitive position for an internship. And it's like, with the rise of something called Cyber Command, I think we're going to see more and more of that. And it's going to get to a point where the military is competing against these companies, and they might discourage that program, at least with the IT field. But Roger, I mean, I heard that and I just thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, it's been around for several years. I think the max you can do it is 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. But this is why I've always had a chip on my shoulder when it comes to vets is, and remove the toxic leadership and they're good leaders, bad leaders, good assignments, bad assignments. Remove all of that stuff. But the reality is, during your tour, you get free college. Okay, now I did 22 years in the Army, and I am nothing special. But here's what I would tell you: through combat deployments, through regular deployments, through overseas service, through CONUS assignments, I've gone through college. I've gone through college at every duty assignment that I've been to. I haven't paid one dime for it, and every degree I have was paid for by the Army. So they've always offered the free college. The difference is people just have different priorities. Now, you can call it fortunate or whatever you want to call it. When I first joined, I wasn't married, didn't have kids. But here's the other thing: like, I didn't get my first degree till after I was married. And it's just one of those things that I knew I had to make a priority. Now, I'm not knocking anybody for not getting a degree. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm just saying is there are the opportunities there, and most soldiers don't take advantage of them. And I'm not even just say soldiers. I'm going to say service members in general. They don't take advantage of those opportunities. And then, with back in the day, the Montgomery GI Bill, and now the post 9/11 GI Bill, there's still opportunities to go. So, I mean, for veterans that, and then, the skill bridge thing, which I think is fantastic. I like the skill bridge thing because I tell you what, man, for those out there, the listeners out there, they know they've been through this stuff. That transition to military to civilian, man, it can be some hot coals you're walking on. It is very tough. And I feel that we are very fortunate that the Army took care of us, collective, all three of us, because especially after doing a career and then coming out, when you just look at healthcare costs, I mean, for the Army was easy. I mean, don't get me wrong. We were put in some tough situations. It's tough when you're not getting paid any money. You're separated from the family. You're deployed overseas or what have you. But there was a big weight off your shoulders when, hey, I know I'm getting paid every 2 weeks. The big weight off my shoulders when I know that, especially when I lived in the barracks, hey, I've got somewhere to sleep every night. I've got electricity. Those basic necessities are taken care of. And I can tell you that, for young adults and even as those that get older, that is a huge weight that you have to worry about: feeding the family, paying the rent. For those that work for the government, or, when you look at the COVID years, dude, I can't even imagine the COVID years for some folks. I mean, can you imagine, you're working a normal commercial job and it's like, hey, you're not coming to work tomorrow because we're shutting down for pandemic. And then then it's 2 weeks, then it's 4 weeks, then it's 6 months, and it's a year. I don't even know how you survive all that stuff. So, I feel very fortunate, especially with the Army and what they provided. So I always have very little, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for most people that get out of the military and don't take advantage or didn't take advantage of the benefits that were there while they served, and then they're still there, after they get out. I think Josh, he did the right thing just like I did with the post 9/11 GI Bill. He does well now, as I do well. We served our careers. We get our retirement pay, but that 9/11 also softens the blow for our kids. Just like with you and your wife, making strategic decisions as far as where you're going to live, residency, and this and that to make sure your kids are taken care of for college. So I think those are all decisions that we've made to benefit our families, knowing the situations that we're in. I just don't have a whole lot of sympathy for folks that don't take advantage of that. Now, back to the skill bridge thing, the one thing, my original point to that was the good thing I think that does is it helps with that transition, because you realize that, hey, man, I was soldier leader of the cycle back in, nobody cares about that, right? It gives you 6 months. It's like what you said with your GPA. They don't care what your GPA is. Hey, we brought you in to be an intern here, so you get to learn that commercial world, and this is what's important. This is what they value. And hey, maybe here are some things. Now, granted, 6 months is not a whole lot of time, but here are some things that I need to improve on before I go out. And if I'm not able to stay with that job or stay with that company, these are things I need to improve on before I go and apply for other positions or what have you. So I know I ranted a little bit there, Josh, but that's it pains me on the veteran thing because of all the benefits that we get.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you started to touch on it there. The skill bridge thing is, it's so important because it helps folks realize that the cultural thing, right? That cultural shift from coming out of uniform and coming into the civilian world, especially in the workplace, because it is truly a different animal. And a lot of vets don't do that. A lot of vets, they retire or they get out and then they go back into the government job somewhere in some capacity, and then you turn around and so and a lot of them never get back into the actual civilian workforce, and then the ones that do, it's culture shock, and I experienced that. But I thought the off ramp process coming out of the army, it's 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 what you get out of it. It's what you put into it, what you get out of it, right? There were some classes that were completely stupid, and I didn't need them. And basically, as a warrant, I just kind of like did the warrant thing and just didn't show up, or I showed up and went and signed in, and then I left. I didn't need to sit there for an hour so you could tell me how to dress for a job interview. Why? Because my parents did that. When I interviewed for my first job at a grocery store bagging groceries, my dad made me wear a suit because that's a job interview, right? It doesn't matter what you're interviewing for. It's a job interview and you'll dress appropriately. So I didn't need that. I didn't need that. I do need my wife to kind of color coordinate, match things for me for my suits. But I know when I know when I need to wear one, and when I don't have to. But the a lot of opportunity. The skill bridge thing I thought was just a fantastic opportunity, and I'm glad to see a lot of people taking advantage of it. So it's the opportunity is out there for everybody. It's just a matter, like you said, what are your priorities, and what do you value right now, and that's really gonna dictate it.
I,
So
I think the most important thing Josh has to consider nowadays when it comes to fashion is coordinating his accessories. For example, he has to match his jackets now, his sport jackets, with his hearing aids. You got to make sure those match up.
you can't have those clashing, man.
That's right.
You can't have those clashing.
those things got to
And
complement.
hey, I'm not knocking any of those folks that didn't finish college or didn't do skill bridge or didn't do the tap. Or hey, if you're happy where you're at, rock and roll, man, badass. I'm knocking the folks that aren't happy where they're at. Army screwed me. Dude, it pains me. Like I literally, to read like the U.S. Army WTF page or whatever, dude, like I can't read that anymore because like our Army is hopeless. I mean, when I read that stuff and the things, and maybe we bitched and complained like that too. We just did it together. We didn't necessarily go on Facebook and complain, to the world about it. But it actually does worry me.
Yeah. I mean, every generation that came into the Army, they always got man, this generation is just not going to be able to cut it, from And our NCOs said the exact same thing about a lot of us when we showed up, as privates or shake and bake specialists like Luke.
They didn't say it
Um,
about me, man. My 2 mile time was too fast.
well, that's true. They were like, well, this guy can run, so he's gonna win a war for us, because he can run real fast. But I believe when we look at the current generation coming into the army, like I truly believe like hey, this generation is not going to be able to cut it, simply because of the wokeness. But I am glad to see that the army finally came full circle. They finally, maybe the identity crisis is over now that they have readopted "Be all you can be"
Really?
as the official army
Did they
motto.
really?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yep. Sergeant Major of the Army, Grinston, whatever his name is, came out. The Army is reinstituting the "Be all you can be" motto,
Good.
which they never should have went away from.
Maybe they'll go back to
If
the
you
old
ask me.
woodland BDUs too.
Yeah,
Now, the
I don't
early
think
Army
that
Strong campaigns were good. Like when they first went to Army Strong, they had a
those are
Hollywood
stupid.
producer come out and do those commercials, do those motivational. Because you got to
You
remember,
would like
those
that.
commercials aren't for us. We were already in. It's for the recruits, and they were pretty good. I mean, it was Hollywood quality. Those were legit.
You would like that. Old Sergeant Major would be like, "Oh no, new motto, I love it. We're gonna get behind it 100%, man." It's stupid. Shut up.
Do they still wear that stupid black beret? Do y'all know?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't think they do because I don't think my daughter's mentioned it at all. So I don't know. I'll have to ask her. So,
Yeah.
all right. So should we? I'm going to leave it up to you, Roger. What we talk about next. We can stay on the theme of kids nowadays because I had a very interesting conversation with some Utes about inflation, what they thought about capitalism, and wow, it was a crazy conversation, and I kind of couldn't believe what I was hearing. I think I shared a little bit of it with y'all. It's like, well, I've got an easy solution to all your problems about hating capitalism and hating corporations. Start making $325,000 a year. Then they're going to be your best friends, and you'll forget all about your problems. We could talk about that, or we could talk about the inflammatory January 6th tapes that McCarthy released to Tucker Carlson. Or we can talk about how many times we've been right about COVID, about the pipeline, the Nord Stream 2. There's just a lot to talk about, current events wise. So I think we're about halfway through right now, so maybe we should get to the meat of the
Let's
matter.
do all three. Let's do all three, and we'll start with your conversation about inflation.
Oh boy! So these are college kids who make really good grades. They've made straight A's through their entire career, except for one B. Now, if you've been listening to the show, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about right now. And we had a reasonable conversation. When I say reasonable, I mean voices were not raised. I made my case, they made theirs, and at one point, my stepson looked down at his phone because I thought I was using the Socratic method on him. I was just saying, well, if that's true, then what about this? I was always asking questions, and they were answering, and they were doing their best based on what they've been fed from whatever they're consuming. They were regurgitating what they've heard, okay, and what they talk about with their friends. And at one point, he picks up his phone and he just starts typing away, and I'm like, okay, he's given up. He's gone to Instagram and he's lost interest. The attention span is done. So basically what they were saying, all three of them is, well, the reason there's inflation is because the corporations are simply jacking up the prices so they can make record profits. And I'm like, okay, there may be individual cases of that, of course, price gouging. But there are laws against that, first of all. But, so it's hard when someone says something like that. Let's break down what you just said. Okay. And then, but as he's typing away, he comes up with this website and he goes, see, this website says that corporations are profiting right now in a high inflation environment where we're heading into a recession. I'm like, well, you're going to have to send me that. What is that? What's the skew on that? And it was actually a government website. It was like the U.S. Bureau of whatever, And I was like, okay, well, I'll take a look at that. If you're saying that corporations are, well, profit, if you're saying that that website is saying that corporations are actively jacking up prices, I'll read it. And 2 days later, I went to that website and it basically was tracking the GDP. And because the GDP went up so rapidly in 2021 and it went up in 2022 as well, it's like, well, that's natural because it was, we put the economy to sleep and now corporations are making money again. And when there is, and this was my point to them, I was like, I don't understand, y'all. You've taken economics classes and I know you made A's in them. Did you not pay attention to the supply and demand and how that affects economy or inflation and all this stuff? It's like, how do you break it down? It's like, we got to get to the very base levels of knowledge about economy and inflation. But the kids now, they're not thinking about this. And my point is, they're bright kids. They're bright kids. They're not stupid. So it's like, how do we walk this back? And at the end of the conversation, I kind of ended it with what I said earlier is like, I can find an immediate problem for you hating all these corporations. And more was said about it. I said, you start making $325,000 a year and tracking a 401k, and you'll start loving corporations. You'll start rooting for them. So much more was said. It's like, well, these corporations. I'm like, well, which corporations? Well, like Amazon, Apple. And he listed off a few others. Like, okay, Amazon and Apple. So you don't like them, right? No, I don't like them. Well, then you're doing internet searches right now on an iPhone. And when was the last time you ordered something off Amazon? And their attitude, and this went over into TikTok too, because we were talking about TikTok as well in this long conversation. Their attitude is this, Roger. And I don't think they're unique. Their attitude with TikTok and the vulnerabilities that obviously presents, and with Amazon and Apple is, well, we have no choice. It's too expensive to do anything else. We have to. We're slaves to corporations. That's basically their argument. Now, again, what do they say, Roger? What did Winston Churchill say? If you're 20 years old and a conservative, you have no heart. If you're 40 years old and a liberal, you have no brain. I think there's a little bit. Yes, I agree with Josh. I'll let you cover that. I do think they'll come around eventually because I have no doubt my stepson's going to be a successful adult. And once he starts making that money, once he starts stacking that cheddar, he's going to be a big fan of his 401k going up, up, up. So, I mean, it was just it was an enlightening conversation. I'm not necessarily, discouraged from it. It's just like, boy, these kids just have a lot to learn, and I can see why Democrats want to lower the voting age lower and lower and lower, and they're catering to this younger generation. So I'm done ranting. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I don't blame them. They'll come around like we all do. Right now, their vested interest is not in, and you hit on the head, it's not in 401ks and those type of things. They're not looking at retirement. His vested interest is the amount it costs him to put gas in his car right now. When he goes to the grocery store, what it costs, because he's got a finite amount of money. He's not putting money away. He's not supporting a wife. He's not supporting kids. He didn't go buy a house, that some squatters are sitting in that he was trying to rent out or something like that. Not that any of us, have ever had that happen, Josh, but all of his interests right now just really revolve around just day-to-day necessities and purchases, right? Eating, gas, entertainment. So that's what's impacting him. But you hit it on the head because that was going to be my thing. Whenever it's like on Twitter, when you ever talk about record profits and this and that. Okay, we won't even go down the supply and demand thing. And I think, you kind of brushed over it. You said it and you brushed over it. People are like, that controls everything, supply and demand, right? And I can raise my prices to be whatever. And if it gets too high, guess what? People won't buy it. But my whole thing is, you know what? I want these companies to make money. I want them to profit because that's what part of my retirement is tied into. It's like, so do you not want your 401k to go up? Do you want it to go down? And that's part of the reason my kids turned 18 years old. I opened up Roth IRAs for both of them, and they both have contributed since the day they turned 18 because it does it broadens their perspective a little bit. They do see that. They don't check numbers every day, but it's like, hey, kids, this is something that's going to be with you to the day that you retire. So they see the broader market moving, and they see the dividends coming in. And it's funny because my kids are now to the point where it's not a lot of money, but they're starting to see some of the dividends come in, and it's like $100 dividend, right? Which $100 to a 20-year-old, dude, that's like 5 cases of beer, McDonald's, and Golden Corral on the weekend, man. Right? I mean, that's crazy money at that age. So it gives them perspective, but it's like, hey, these dividends, and that's the learning point, right? These dividends are from the profits of these companies that your 401k or your Roth IRA is invested in. So you want them to make money. Now, you can go out and buy individual stocks, and hey, if the oil company's making money, guess what? Go invest in it. Everybody's got, especially nowadays, man. Nowadays, you can get on here and get on Robinhood, Webull, Charles Schwab. There's 1,000 others out there that you can open up the account for free. There are no more, most of these places don't even charge you to trade anymore. Like back in our day, it used to be like $12, $13 to buy a share, and 12 or 13 to sell it. You never make any money. Now it's all free. Hey, man, throw $50 in there. You can buy fractional shares, But anyway, back to your point, I don't really, it's frustrating as heck. We don't have as many of those conversations with my kids because I think just early on, we had those conversations, especially with the Roth IRA. So I think they kind of get it. And especially my daughter now kind of living on her own, doing her own thing. And my son, my kids, as soon as they turned 16, they got their jobs. We gave them hey, you're going to pay $200 a month for your car payment. And that along with the Roth IRA, it's kind of broadened their perspective a little bit. But so I don't worry about it too much because like you said, once he gets out and gets his job and he goes to buy his first house and, his company gives him a 3.5% match in his 401k, he'll start caring. At that point, his vested interests will broaden a little bit beyond just the cabbage that you're buying today or whatever. But, the backside to that as well is, hey, man, and don't get me wrong, inflation comes and goes. And you can make the argument over how much the administration policies have to impact that. If you had a Republican in office for 40 years, you're still going to go through inflation and all that other good stuff. But, once they hit that point, they'll understand it. They'll have the vested interest in it. And I think at that point, it comes full circle, right? And hopefully they'll be here 20 years from now, trying to beat the same thing into their kids. Like, you just don't understand. You don't understand. And he's going to school for free, right? Like, basically, like his college is free right now.
Yeah, it's free right now because of benefits. Josh is, I know, so
right.
disappointing. Yes, but yeah,
so
100%. And you know what? Hey, I'll give him this.
Also...
I'll give him this. He was acknowledging, not necessarily privilege, but he was like, hey, I know I have it easy. So I think they're conscious of their situation. But I also think that they're fine. How many years ago was it? He was, I think, 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old. And he and my daughter, they had to sit through one of my lectures. She was 11 at the time and he's 8. And I'm sitting there in my living room and I have my whiteboard out. And my wife took a picture of me lecturing the kids, pointing at the whiteboard and writing stuff out. And I explained to them and I broke it down that y'all are going to be the first generation economically that has it harder than we did. It's going to be tougher than the generation before since a long time back. And they're finally starting to realize that. Not so much my daughter because she's on Uncle Sugar's little teat, but the kid's going in, he's going to go into the workforce and he's finally starting to realize, holy crap, I'm going to have to work. And I've always said this. I ended the conversation like this. I said, I've always said that you kids in certain situations have a very specific BS radar. Your BS detector is finely tuned for certain things. I give you credit for that. Number 2, I do think y'all will work. I think a certain number of y'all will work. I really do. I think that they will want to maintain the same level of quality of life that they had when they were growing up, and they will bust their ass to do that. Trouble is they won't get ahead because they'll be spending all their money on quality of life stuff. I said I was done ranting,
right.
But I'm sorry.
And you're spot on with the BS meter, and I'll throw it over to Josh for his thoughts. You're spot on with the BS meter because I tell you, I hear it daily. And my son, he's probably, he obviously doesn't have the experience, just the institutional knowledge and the life experience, right, with all the money and policies and this and that. But he is very close to that independent conservative / libertarian. I think he's very much in line with us. He just leave me alone, give me my guns, let me drive my car without, the catalytic converter, and everybody's happy, right? And, some of the classes he's taken now, especially he's got a project management degree, or that's what his major is. And dude, it's every single class. It is, LGBTQ plus. What policies do you have to cater to everybody? What procedures do you have to have? How is the relationship more dynamic now in the office and stuff? But I tell you, and I'm not talking about just that specifically, but just in general, they see through it. They see through it as much as these schools and these institutionalized activists try to pump this stuff in them. Most of them see through it. I can't say most of them. But, it sounds like your kids have. I think Josh's kids will, and I think my kids have. So. Good call on that. I think you're spot on. Josh?
Yeah, I agree with Roger. They're young. They don't know what they don't know. I mean, I try and put myself in their shoes when I was, 20, 21, 22 years old. You asked me what the consumer price index was. I couldn't tell you. But I'd be like, what? What is that? I don't know what that is. I looked at my LES, and my LES was my LES, and I went to Smoke Bomb Hill Class 6 and got my case of beer for the weekend. And so that was that. So I didn't know. So I mean, I think the fact that they're it's and talking about the crew that you were talking to, I think the fact that they were willing to sit there and parry questions and have questions and answer questions. I mean, I think that in itself is huge, right? Because that means they're willing to learn. Maybe they didn't hear half the stuff you said, but they sat there. I will say the whole the hatred against corporations. Now, yeah, I said I didn't know what the CPI was when I was their age, but I didn't hate big corporations then either. Like I never ever lamented corporations. I never lamented the rich, ever in my life. I've absolutely never done that. Even coming from meager beginnings. Who was it? Adam Carolla. Adam Carolla did a spill, and he talked about how kids these days have changed 100%, and he's spot on with this. Used to there'd be a dad walking through town with his kid, and Mr. Johnson drives by in a big black Cadillac, and the kid would be like, man, I want a car like that. And the dad would say, well, you keep your nose to the grindstone, you work hard, you get good grades, you do the right thing, and you can have a big black Cadillac one day too. Now it's, well, why does he have that? Why don't I have one? Why does he make all that money? Why does he have a house on top of the hill? Let's go throw rocks at it. And that is different in that regards with this generation. And it started, it started a long time ago, but it started also with the Occupy Wall Street movement. They sat out there, and protested, big corporations, like much like your stepson's like, oh, you're protesting? How'd you organize that? Oh, you organize that on your iPhone? Okay. And the other thing with the BS meter, I agree and disagree with with kids today and their BS meters. My kids have pretty good BS meters. They can pick it up. They can pick it up pretty quick. But then, with that being said, kids today should be able to pick up the BS meters from websites like, well, the government tells me this. Okay, why do you think the government's telling you that? Because that's what they want you to think when you're sitting in class and you're going through all that DEI shit that's now part of schools and college and everything. You should be able to suss that out really quick, that this is all nonsense, this is all bullshit. And so uh they may have good BS meters, but it doesn't sound like some of them are they need some fine tuning to be able to pick up on what they're arguing in a sense. So
I agree with that. It's like it finely tuned BS meter, right? Finely tuned on certain things, I guess, because with the TikTok conversation, it's like, God, man, do you not see how you're being manipulated? This is a formula. I mean, this is based on, you know, actual scientific research on how the brain gets addicted to things. It takes into it basically, they took Vegas studies that Vegas has perfected to get people to keep pulling that handle. Intermittent reward system, intermittent hits of dopamine. It's going to happen this time. Oh, it didn't happen that time. Okay, maybe three more times and it'll happen. I mean, it's insidious, man. It's a menace. It's a menace. So I don't want to forget this, and we got plenty of time. But Josh wanted Roger and I, and I'm sure Josh will be in on the conversation this time because Roger and I started texting at about 7:30 at night, and Josh had been asleep for 2 hours already, so he missed out on a really good conversation that Roger and I had. Truth be told, there's probably a little, it's probably a little alcohol involved, feeling the love and all this stuff. Got a little philosophical about Bible and God, the nature of God, and all this stuff. We talk about that later, though. Maybe we'll close that one out. Talk about that for a little while, but yeah. So don't only forget. So that was I was doing when Roger, you called me out, and you're like, his calls was paid for, right? I was scrolling back through probably 1,000 texts trying to find that thread. I love it. That happened to me today. Twice I looked down at my phone, 43 notifications. I'm like, God, man, those guys are going off. So I'd clear that out and I'd check it an hour and a half later. 68 notifications. I'm like, oh, they're going off about something. So yeah, scrolling back to a previous conversation can take some time. So Roger, your choice. I'll kick it to you. I mean, what do we talk about when it comes to how right we've been about COVID? I was talking to a couple of friends today, old Teddy and Jeremy, and boy, it's just nice to sit down and talk to like-minded people that aren't you two guys, because I know we agree on a lot and we talk all the time, but to get that other input from other folks, it's like, man, you guys felt exactly like I did, about, we were talking about COVID in particular, and man, old Teddy, that was a significant emotional event for him, the whole COVID thing. And as I'm sure he's talked to you about before, it shook him, but it wasn't COVID that shook him. It was everyone's reaction to it. It's like, you people, you can't possibly be this stupid. And his faith, I don't want to get too personal, what he shared with me, but it shook him, and I felt the same way. And, we can go down the list on the recent revelations, and the big thing is, lab leak, masks, vaccines, natural immunity. Take your pick. We were calling this pretty early. All of these things. We talked about Plandemic, that video. Go back and watch that now. Holy cow. Were they just guessing on a lot of that? I don't know, maybe, but those were damn good guesses. I'd like to think that the conclusions we were reaching were from 10th grade biology class, but I'll kick it to you. You can either, you may not want to go down that road, because, patting ourselves on the back, that's a nice way of putting it, a non-graphic way of putting it. We don't want to do that all over the audience, but at the same time, what's going on? Are people just that stupid, or do you want to talk about Nord Stream 2 or January 6th? Up to you, man.
Well, you know what? COVID boils down to this. Okay. I understand the initial scare. I get it. It was something new. It's going to kill everybody. So I get that. I even get the 2-week thing, 2-week lockdown for the healthcare systems, and you don't want to overburden the hospitals. I understand it. But then, like you said, your 6th grade science kind of kicks in after a little while, and you're like, okay, this no longer makes sense. And the problem is they took a health scare and politicized it. Period. They didn't like the guy that's in office, and they took a health scare and they politicized it. And the problem with that is the common person, majority of the common people out there, in my opinion, did not take it to be a political matter. They were still taking it to be a health scare. And there are still people out there today, regardless of the studies. And I forget the link that I shot to you guys the other day. But I'm not surprised. It's a very renowned organization that did this study on the efficacy of masks, right? And they've been doing studies on masks now for 2 years, and even before then. But the bottom line is, most of those other studies, people are like, we don't really trust them. They were fun about it. This here is like a straight and narrow, like, people believe these people or this organization. And I have to pull the name of it. But anyway, they basically came out and said, hey, man, like everything we looked at, masks really didn't do anything for you. There may have been like a 0.0001%, improvement or reduction in the fact how you catch stuff because of the mask. But and it wasn't because of just the mask itself. We brought this up, but it's our lifestyle and just, how we wear them, are they fitted, the material, just everything, right? So anyway, the COVID thing just went from something that was a health scare to something that became politicized. I kind of want to touch on what Josh was talking. He typed up there, do Americans have the right to rebel? And I want to tie that in with the January 6th videos. Okay. Now the right to rebel it's touchy because it becomes like Lincoln, right? You can't secede. You can't leave. It's unconstitutional. You just can't do it. Well, of course, anybody who's in power is going to come up with those rules. I mean, you do it as parents. So obviously, you had the technical, legal, U.S. code. Obviously, well, I guess it's how you rebel, right? But when you talk about force or violence or something like that, by U.S. code would be illegal. I know it's not necessarily exactly parallel, but when you look at the January 6th videos, and I'll kick this over to Josh. So there were over 40,000 hours of video withheld. I'm going to answer my own question and I'll get Josh's thoughts on it. Both sides are outraged. They're all pissed off at Tucker Carlson. They're all pissed off at McCarthy for giving Tucker Carlson the videos, right? Hey, how come the Dems didn't release it? How come it didn't come out in the January 6th committee? Now all of a sudden it's being released and everybody's pissed off. It's just going to hurt democracy and this and that. Like, why is everybody so scared to release the videos? Like, you don't even have to put a headline on there. Hey, release the videos. Here you go. Let the people watch it themselves and choose, come to their own conclusions on what happened. Why? Because it was about Trump. Again, they took an incident, and we're not talking about the protests. We're talking about the folks that actually were involved in the riots and broke in the Capitol, whatever. But I tell you this, I did watch the videos, right? Now, I'm not downplaying, and I agree with Tucker, where hey, man, there's a certain percentage there. I mean, there were busted windows and there were some violent folks there. I get it. But again, we can have mostly peaceful protests, right? I mean, wasn't that the term, Josh? It was mostly peaceful. So I think we can actually use that because I watched the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, be escorted, and you can call it what you want. Okay, I'm not even saying right, left, conspiracy, whatever. Call it whatever you want. I watched several minutes of that video of him being escorted through the Capitol, and at one point, the police officers actually opened the door for him. That is what I saw. Okay, I'm not downplaying some of the violence that happened. I get it. Obviously, that should have never happened. But I saw a lot of escorting. I saw a lot of folks who condoned maybe some of the actions. And I tell you, the majority of what I saw, and I'm not going to go so far as say just sightseeing, but, we can go back to what the left used. It was mostly peaceful.
One thing that occurred to me, and Josh, I'll forget this. If Josh talks, I'll forget this. So let me kick this straight to you. One thing that occurred to me with the police escorting around, because I try to be as objective as possible, right? If I'm there, I'm on camera, I'm thinking, a smart person would think they're already in here. The situation is out of control. Let's just make sure he doesn't go down this particular hallway. So let's, they're already in here. The building's already compromised. We've just got to keep them out from going further. So yeah, you're escorting him around. I'm saying this is a possibility. You're escorting him around. It's somewhat friendly at this point. We don't want this on tape, us beating this guy to death or shooting him. That's not necessary. Maybe possibly there was some good judgment by the Capitol Police right there that, hey, okay, they're already in here. Let's just keep them in line. Hey, sir, you don't go down that hall. You can go this way. Maybe there was that going on because there's no sound there. So look, I'm with you, Roger. I agree with you on everything. But I guess my overall point, Josh, is that there's a lot of context still missing to all this because it's been painted in a certain way. What was my reaction, Josh, when I watched that going down live? It was laughter. I was laughing at it for numerous reasons. But again, I'm not defending. I'm not one side or the other on that. It's just like, maybe it wasn't a bad idea to escort him around, even if you're on the left.
And I think that's all right. But at the end of the day, the narrative that had already been painted, which has been painted now, because half these people that have gone on Twitter to say all this stuff haven't even watched the videos, it was to get Trump out of office. So let's make no mistake about it. Whether you like him, love him, hate him, whatever. The whole point of all that, of everything you saw with the January 6th, Cheney, Katzinger, all of that stuff was to get Trump out of the office. Or Trump out of office. Period.
Well,
or to keep him from running again. Sorry.
Exactly, to ensure he'd
Right.
never be in office again. Okay. Josh is seething. Go ahead, Josh.
Nah, dude, I'm good. No, I agree. So the January 6th video, again, and Roger hit it on the head. Both sides are upset because it destroys the narrative that Trump incited a crowd and they went to the Capitol to try and destroy it. And as far as the police go, I think that's Luke. I think the reasoning on that is logical. But I think you got to go back before the shaman even went inside to when the Capitol Police one let them through barricades, removed barricades before them, right? And this is before anybody decided that they were going to try and go in the Capitol. When the police started moving barricades, and then the police fired a tear gas canister into the police. I forget which side of the Capitol happened on, but there's video out there. They literally shot a tear gas canister into themselves. Now, whether that was a negligent discharge, whether whether it might have bounced off something, it didn't appear like that, and to me in the video that I saw. But and then coming out with the emails and the correspondence where Pelosi refused additional security. To me, it was a setup. It was an absolute setup, and I think the Capitol Police knew what they were doing, um, and the whole Ray Epps thing still hasn't been answered or addressed. They've arrested people for inciting people to go into the Capitol. Here you have Ray Epps on multiple videos, multiple instances doing that very thing, yet nothing. And then Ray not answering the question whether there were FBI personnel in the crowd that day that were also inciting people to go into the Capitol. So I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I don't understand. Well, I understand, but the fact that the government is upset that unclassified video has been released to the media, that should piss people off, and that should scare the shit out of people.
Both sides.
Both sides. Yes, 100%. That should have been released the day of. The next day should have been like, here's all the video, here's everything that happened, right? But the fact that the government both sides didn't want that released, telling you, it's bad news. It's bad news, and it's going to lead that right there. That action such as that, it's going to lead to another January 6th type event, and this one's not going to be as benign, right? It's not going to be some dude in a Viking helmet and a loincloth.
But you don't condone that. You're.
I don't condone that.
Of course, we got to qualify that.
I'll qualify
for
that.
posterity's sake.
Right? I'll qualify that. But I will say this. There's going to come a point in time in this country where people are going to realize that the system is unchangeable. And what happens when a system is unchangeable? How do you change it? And that's where we get back to, do the people have a right to rebel? You asked that question, when it was just you and I, and it's a great question. And I'd love to get Roger's thought on it.
Isn't that convenient?
Yeah. Do people have a right to rebel when the system is unchangeable?
Rebel or revolution? I revolution, maybe stick with that. I mean, because rebelling could be civil disobedience, right? Which
well,
is
and that was kind of my point I was making earlier. Well, first of all, I want to address the you're saying that another January 6th is going to happen. It's already been happening. What do you think the Antifa riots are? I mean, how many federal courthouses, state facilities, federal facilities, city facilities? Dude, they literally, the Chaz, we just talked, or you guys talked about this last episode. I mean, how many blocks was the Chaz? I mean, they basically took it over, right? They've been doing this. And so it's not just a right thing. It's not just a left thing. When it comes to rebelling, okay, and obviously, I'll qualify this, as Luke has done several times, we obviously don't advocate for the overthrow of anything. it's tough because you'll never be in the right. Because the reality is, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Bill of Rights. I believe in the America that the founding fathers, what they saw for us. Okay, the problem that you have is a lot of the folks on the left, a lot of the progressives, don't see it the same. And so, I don't have a good answer. The question you want to say is, or the answer you want to give is, hey, if we veer from our constitutional rights, I don't know that you actually call that rebelling to take it back to the Constitution within those rights and those laws. If you veered that far away. But at the same time, then you also say, well, you also have elected officials, and they go and change those laws. It's I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer because I think it's very sticky. I would want to revert back to the principles our founding fathers laid out and the Constitution. But then what happens legislatively if those things are changed? I don't know that you do have that right.
Well, the way I know Josh has a question, but the way it's currently written is if all of your rights are taken away in the law itself, and I should do my due diligence and look this up again, find it where it says basically armed insurrection, revolution is illegal. We all get asked that
there's a U.S.
on
code
our
for it.
SF-86, right? It's a U.S. code. That U.S. code does not qualify. Well, if all your rights are taken away, then you can do it. It just says, no, it's illegal. It's illegal to do it. So if all your rights are taken away, you don't have, it's still illegal. So that doesn't require a response. So Josh, you go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry.
Well, so I got a question. So I have a question for Roger, but I have a question for you now as well. So it's illegal. Well, wasn't it illegal in 1775 as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think that was my point when we first started out with this, that anybody who's in control is going to make that illegal, right? That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter.
Right. So when Luke asked me that question, I was like, well, no, because, one, we literally just got done liberating a nation, from that. But I couldn't point to a specific thing, and I feel kind of bad, but it's literally laid out in the Declaration of Independence. So, side note, so I started taking a class today, and it's intro to the Constitution. And literally, like within the first 45 minutes, I learned a couple of new things. I was like, oh shit, like, this is legit. So anyway, so the Declaration of Independence lays out, and I'll quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness."
What is the people? Define the people. I'm just like, what's the people? Is that
Us.
is that I know, but is that 51% of the people, or is that 3%? Just because 3% view it, you know what I'm saying? I'm not.
No, I get what you're saying.
Just a discussion.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I don't know. I don't know if there has to, I don't know if that means 3% or 51% or what. But it lays it out in the Declaration of Independence, the intent, of the Bill of Rights, the intent of the Second Amendment. And we talk about this a lot. The intent of the Second Amendment was not, for hunting. The intent of the Second Amendment was to protect yourself from a tyrannical government, even if it be your own. So Roger, I know I said I was going to ask you a question. In the what I just read out of the Declaration of Independence, granted, yes, U.S. code may be it may say it's illegal. So kind of a two-part question. One is the U.S. code that says armed insurrection is illegal. Is that constitutional? Is that a constitutional law? And two, does the Declaration of Independence outline the right for the people to rebel and abolish a tyrannical government?
So one, I think when you look at the Declaration of Independence, I know this is going to sound dumb. I'm not trying to play that anybody's ignorant. The Declaration of Independence was the formal break from England. The rights that are listed and the statements in the Declaration of Independence are enumerated in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You're always going to have a law that prevents that, armed insurrection, armed revolution, because you actually need it for survival, right? Otherwise, the Constitution wouldn't continue to exist because you have to have some way. You have to have some way for it to defend itself. I think the challenge becomes, because the Constitution does provide a way to add amendments, right? The Constitution does provide a way to change. So the true question, and I know it sounds like I'm squirting, around it. What worries me is what happens, and I don't feel this way. I'm just hypothetically, let's look 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. What happens when the voters vote and there are enough changes and or amendments to the Constitution that were legally done, that is laid out in the Constitution, that take it away from the original intent? Then at that point, do you have because at that point, I argue you don't have the right to vote, because the Constitution laid out a process. And if that process is being followed, and additions and changes are being made and amendments are being added, then I'd make the argument that you don't necessarily have that right.
Well, I think that I really think that Thomas Jefferson saw this coming, and I think that I would love to hear Thomas Jefferson, resurrect him, to hear this conversation. I think he would lay it out very clearly. He'd say, "Psst, don't tell anyone, but I saw this coming. The Constitution has flaws because it was written by men, and it can progress down this road." He was a revolutionary. What he saw in France changed him. He knew it was going to go like this. That's why he left us all these quotes and all these secret letters he'd send to people. It's like, hey, man, when you see this stuff start burning down, or when you see this stuff, what Roger just outlined right there, when you see it's taking a turn for the worse because the masses are stupid, man, the tree of liberty and all that, how it gets refreshed. And yeah, I mean, I don't advocate for anything like that. I try to be as positive as I can, but I think Thomas Jefferson saw that stuff coming, 100%.
Well, I mean, even Jefferson said that a constitution was only good for 20 years, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Every
flat out said
19
that.
years.
And I think it was every 19 years. I mean, he said that in a letter to, to one of his buddies. Hey man, these things really only last for like 19 years, and then that's going to be a wrap. So I get what you're saying about, amending the Constitution and changing the Constitution, but I'm talking about when the system is unchangeable. That was my original thing.
But
You have a
you'd have to
right to
define that.
rebel
You'd have to, like, what does that mean? Like
when elections no longer
unchangeable.
matter. When elections no longer matter. When elections are so fraught with fraud that it really doesn't matter.
Or if both options, all two or possibly three options you have, are the same option. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's not even
Yeah.
fraud at that point. I think all three of us agree. Well, maybe not Roger so much, but it's getting to a point where the two parties are just starting to kind of go like this. Roger, I think it was Roger that said, everyone was outraged on both sides of the aisle that this was released. Well, that tells me they're on the same side, which they're not on my side. So it's not just fraud. It's that, well, who are we really electing here? Is this truly our representative? They're not representing me.
Right.
Corporatist, authoritarian, technocracy. Is that what it was? But I don't know. This is a complex thing. How could we ever possibly solve it? But it is something worth talking and thinking about. It's like, how do you affect change? All these things.
Yeah. And I don't subscribe to the I would never ever support or recommend an armed rebellion against the against the government. I mean, I think there are instances where it is acceptable. I mean, at a certain point, which side would you have been on in 1775? In 1776, you'd be like, no, it's never acceptable. It's like, okay, well, you know, if they come out tomorrow and like the Bill of Rights is abolished, it's done. We're completely ignoring it. Now, again, that's an extreme example, but I mean, to say never, I don't deal in absolutes. I think we're a long way away from it. But I wouldn't, I don't want somebody to come back, 5 years from now, listen to C3 and be like, you guys said never.
Well, no,
right?
fortunately for us, and Josh, you talked about this, it's a chipping away of rights. Unfortunately for us, we'll be dead long gone before I think it gets, beyond to what we see is that extreme, right? Because it'll be gradual, and our kids will see it, and our grandkids will see it, because at that point, it's a different ball game going from now to, okay, no more Second Amendment. But even with that, so, support and defend the Constitution. Well, if constitutionally those rights change in accordance with the Constitution, so it's like saying, well, no, I just don't like it. Because that's always been my thing with the Second Amendment. And I'm with you guys, and don't get me wrong. I think the founding fathers would have burned this thing down 15 years ago, just my opinion. But, it's like my whole argument with the Second Amendment is like, I know why it was created. I'm obviously a supporter of the Second Amendment. A supporter of my right to have my guns to fight against a tyrannical government or defend myself against a tyrannical government. But what if through the methods listed in the Constitution, that amendment is changed?
Yeah.
So it becomes a catch-22, right? It truly does. And again, I don't think, I don't think there's things that it gets that extreme in our lifetime. Thank God that, I don't think we'll be making those tough decisions. But I think those are decisions that our kids will make.
Well, there's a precedent for it, prohibition and the repeal. I mean, mistakes were made.
Yeah.
It's fallible. We live in a fallible system, and I whatever. We go all philosophical with it, but I can say this, Josh, 100%, that despite the movies, despite the mystique, I do not place a whole lot of trust in people who are quite possibly unelected. I won't say the word deep state, unelected bureaucrats who've been working in the CIA, who are making decisions and giving recommendations for people who have the authority to say, yes, go. I have very little faith in the decisions they're making right now. And, well, Luke, what do you know? Luke, Josh, Roger, what do y'all know, man? Y'all aren't CIA. You never went to the farm. You're not sitting in those halls. Well, you know what else? I'm also not a biologist. I'm also not a doctor. I know what a woman is. And I also know what I was right on. We were right on coming to COVID. And I see some of these decisions being made. I think all three of us know, and I think the nation is coming closer to knowing what really happened with Nord Stream 2. And I do not see in any way how that is a benefit. Now, somebody with a doctorate, with a PhD in national security studies or foreign relations and all this stuff will try to explain to me, no, this was our plan. We wanted to head Russia off the pass so that Germany wouldn't take the bait and, start. But so Nord Stream 2, let's talk about Nord Stream 2. I'm going there. The preponderance of evidence from the very beginning, I think we talked about it. I think one of our cover art was about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We did almost, a good portion of an episode on it. And we're like, no way Russia did this. No way Russia did this. And I was panicked, not panicked, but I was like, boy, this is a serious thing. Because what are wars fought over? Resources. They're fought over resources historically. And boy, oh boy, let me tell you, we're talking about the cold winter for Europe and all that stuff. And when that pipeline went up, I saw the makings of a no shit continental world war in Europe. Boy, if we did this without Europe's approval and they find out about it, well, that's bad news for the globe, right? But what I think happened was everyone agreed, let's just do this. Let's just do this so that Russia doesn't have any kind of bargaining chip. They all agreed to it. Somebody was talked into doing that. But effectively, as we were texting today, we said, by doing that, They effectively removed a viable off ramp to end this thing, to end the conflict in Ukraine. That is no longer a bargaining chip Russia even has. So we're backing that rat further and further into a corner, a nuclear armed rat with with a triad with the capability of delivering intercontinental ballistic missiles. Who is making these choices? Do you have any trust anymore about any of this stuff? Man, you're giving me that psycho look, Josh. You got that killer look in your eye, man.
No, I
God,
don't, dude. I don't trust any of them.
God Almighty.
I I don't trust any of them from either party really, because they just continuously lie. Like you said, COVID, January 6th, Nord Stream 2. And we did talk about, we spent a large portion of an episode talking about it. And we ran down about how it didn't make sense for Russia to destroy their own pipeline. It gave them zero advantage anywhere with anyone by them doing it themselves. They were like, this has to be, it has to be either the US or one of our allies did that. And when you start looking at capabilities to do that, not a lot of capes out there, for people to do that. And I think it was even Roger brought up the fact it was like there was U.S. ships literally in the area, when when it happened. And and of course, people came out and people were like, "Oh, you guys are spewing Kremlin talking points and this, that, and the other." And it's like, come today, it's like, oh look, it was a pro-Ukrainian group, quote unquote pro-Ukrainian group. Sometimes we call them the CIA, that did it. So it, pro-Ukrainian group, not to be named, did this, and again, it just there was no positive of that. There's no positive outcome by doing that. We took like you said, we took a great off ramp, off the table permanently to, to end this thing. Russia's going to keep, even if Russia doesn't make another advance, Russia's going to keep Crimea. They're not going to give up Crimea, period. And they're going to keep a large portion of the Donbas. And, things are reverted now to trench warfare in a lot of places. Russia's still making some advances in Bakhmut. So apparently Zelensky's pouring a lot more resources into Bakhmut to try and hold it. Even Austin, Secretary of Defense, went over and made a surprise visit to Iraq today. Even he said, he was like, Bakhmut is, it's zero tactical, significance. So I'm not sure why Ukraine's trying to hold it. Maybe because they don't want to lose it for propaganda purposes. I don't know. But again, we went over we went over the cabinet, Biden's cabinet, and when you put guys like Blinken up front on these things, it just doesn't work out well. The foreign policy of this administration has been a disaster by and large, just a complete dumpster fire of a disaster.
We called that one too, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you go look at the Iran nuclear deal. Well, guess what? Now Russia's going to provide, Iran all the nuclear material that they need to finish out their weapons. Afghanistan, the debacle that was. North Korea. We were literally at a point with North Korea during the Trump administration to where you had Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon literally shaking hands and stepping over back and forth, the border at the DMZ. And now you have Kim Jong-un's sister came out with today. It was like, if the U.S. keeps doing exercises, like, we're going to go hot. India's moved more toward Russia a little bit from the Ukraine thing, because we came out and we blasted them after they didn't vote in support of, sending Russia a strongly worded letter last year when they continued the invasion. People not understanding why India did that, because India depends on Russia for a lot of things. Mainly, all of their air defense artillery and a lot of their weapon systems, they're all Russian. They buy that stuff from Russia, and they buy a lot of oil from Russia. They buy a lot of oil from Iran. And so it just, people don't get these things. People don't understand these things. And so when they see it in the news, they're like, oh, well, whatever. It's not a big deal. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's not until it is. And when it is a big deal, then it's going to be a really big deal.
I think it's as simple as this when it comes to, the Ukraine thing and Russia and all this stuff. I still think there's enough Cold Warriors in position of power up there in the CIA, the halls of power, the NSC, and now ODNI, who have said, now this is our big chance. We're going to, we've been waiting on an opportunity like this since Afghanistan. Now we're going to do it right. The problem with that is if this thing continue, we're taking our eye off the ball. And we've been saying this on the podcast over and over and over. It's like, yes, do I think that we should continue to degrade Russia? Sure. Yes, I do. Is it
Yep.
worth the cost that we're going to end up paying for this? That remains to be seen. That truly remains to be seen. But where should our eye be right now? Our eye should be on Russia. Yeah. Roger said, narrative is already changing. It's now the Russians or a non-government backed Ukrainian group. Yeah. It's, but it's, but again, I think our eye is off the ball. It remains to be seen whether this is worth it or not. Because again, as Josh is always saying, two things can be right at the same time. Two things can also be wrong at the same time. I can think Zelensky is an absolute menace. And I can also think that Russia needs to be, put to heel a little bit. You know what I'm saying? But what does put to heel mean? Does that mean just rub their faces in the dirt, put your boot on their neck, and just ground them into non-existence? What good is that going to do? Russia's still going to exist. It's like, I'll say it again, man. We've said it, a half a dozen times over the past year. Maybe the best thing is to, get in bed with Russia a little bit. And I'm no Putin sympathizer. Hell no. Remove him. Let's do something right. Let's get some people in there who are our friends. Let's get some pipelines going. Let's get some mutual interests, and let's turn that shit against China, because that is the
Yep.
threat. I understand
Yeah.
Russia is a nuclear armed power. I understand that. But China's the threat, and we're taking our eye off the ball. And if you think for a freaking second that China isn't watching this and just like twisting their mustache and, smiling and thinking, man, this is great. We can just sit back and do whatever the hell we want. Everything is backfiring. We're driving Russia into China's arms. I just don't trust that there's a thought process behind this. Is all I'm saying, Josh.
No, I no, I don't trust it at all. And so you bring up China, Taiwan's also looking at this, and you know, Taiwan. Granted, the United States government does not officially recognize Taiwan as as a sovereign country. I had to explain that to somebody here recently. That they're like, no, Taiwan is its own country, and we have an embassy there. And I was like, yeah, no, we don't. Like we do not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign country. I was like, I'm pretty sure this one is these red lines. Um, I also had to explain to somebody that China was not part of NATO, so that tells you anything about how that conversation went. So Taiwan is watching this. Taiwan's watching this. Taiwan watched Afghanistan, and Taiwan's like, man, who are we going to basically have to broker a deal with, and kind of acquiesce to? Do we have faith that the United States is going to come to our aid and come to our defense? I'm gonna tell you right now, they don't. They're looking at this. They're looking at everything that's happened, and they're like, we're just gonna have to make a deal with the devil, because Z is going to take Taiwan, whether he does it politically, whether he does it militarily, he's going to take it. And some people have opined that it's going to be 2024 when Taiwan has their presidential elections. We also have our presidential election, and the country turns into a shit show every 4 years for those elections. And you know it, so maybe the distraction of that will allow Z to take it a little better. Will we militarily defend Taiwan? Biden came out and said we would, and then of course they had to walk that back because they were like, whoa, 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 you know. So I don't know. Um, I don't know what's going to happen. or when I should say, I don't know when it's going to happen. But if you go back and everything that Z has said that he was going to do, he has done. He has absolutely done it. And the world better take him at his word when he says that he will reunify Taiwan with the mainland, right? And that's not going to be pretty for anybody. It's not going to be pretty for the world economy. It's not going to be pretty for anything. And I don't have faith that the USG is going to be able to effectively, mitigate that at all. I mean, McCarthy's getting set to meet with the president, with the leadership of Taiwan. They're going to do it in the states now because they didn't want to do it in Taiwan, and anger Z. So
It's
I don't know, man. I think the next 5 years are going to be pretty interesting in the Pacific.
well, as the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, right? So maybe they're doing us a favor. So it's Roger. It's not that we don't like him. He can still hear and see us fine, but he's in a hotel. I'm in a hotel. Josh has good internet for once, but we'll start wrapping it up. So Roger's frozen, so he's still with us in spirit and in body. He just can't talk. I kind of like it. Josh. So basically, we'll start kind of maybe this trend will catch on, and we'll ask the audience what annoys you, and we'll kind of address it right here. And one of our listeners, Rodney, he texted me while we're recording. I don't know how he knew we were recording, and he said, "I want to address this." He said, "Tell people," he goes, "address this on your next podcast. It pisses me the f off. Tell people to stop walking around with their phones on speaker when I don't give one rat's ass to hear their conversation. Put earbuds in or put the phone up to your ear. I hate people being rude and making me hear things I don't want to hear, or Charlie Brown's teacher walking around. Enough," in all caps. So I don't know who you want us to tell, Rodney, because I guarantee you no one in our audience does that, but I'm with you, bro. That is annoying. It's just annoying. I'm self-conscious enough walking around with my earbuds in, having a conversation with someone, like walking around the store or something like that. I just feel like it's rude. I feel like I'm being rude to other people, having them listen to my end of the conversation when they're not in it. It's just, I don't know. It just makes me feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. It's just I don't know. Josh, do you think people do that, like, to show off? Like, look at me, I'm talking to somebody. Because it's the most ridiculous, stupid thing when you see that going on. Yeah, surely you've seen that. You live in North Carolina, for God's sakes.
No, I've seen it, dude. I've seen it countless times. I don't think they do it to show off. I think they do it simply because they have no respect for others. It's it's completely asinine, completely ridiculous, selfish. The worst is when I see people do it and they're like checking out of a store, you're the cash register, and an employee's trying to talk to them, ring up their sale, and they're having a conversation on their AirPods or whatever, and you're just like, "Gah." How it's rude.
Dude, yeah. See, my wife and I will, I told you I was uncomfortable talking, but my wife and I talk on the phone a lot. And a lot of times I'm in the store or she is. And when we get to the checkout counter, it's like, okay, I'm about to check out. I'll call you in a little while. It's always that. Because
Yep.
it's just, it's not even a second thought.
No.
Boy, there's some rude people in the world, man. It's rude people. One of my things that bothers me, Rodney and Josh, is when people walk into any establishment. It doesn't matter. They walk in the entrance or the exit for that matter. They cross the threshold and they stop. What are you doing? Do you really? Did you not understand you were walking into a Target? Now you're in the Target and you have to just stop and just survey the surroundings for a moment. Just really appreciate the fact you're in Target. Or maybe you forgot the reason you came in the first place. You look like you're 30 years old, but you might be 85 with a little working on, a little case of dementia is working in the brain. I don't know. That shit, I'm telling you, that gets my goat every time.
You got to get out of the fatal funnel.
Yes, right. So, Josh, I don't know the shout outs. I'm going to give a couple of things. Since Roger's not with us, we kind of wanted to talk about our deep discussion where, every once in a while when you're talking to your bros, you start complimenting them stuff, and it got kind of gross a little bit. But it started out the nature of God and Bible, and I'll just save that for next time because Roger's doing something pretty cool right now, and I want him to talk about that, or I wish he would. But shout outs, it's the usual suspects. It's everyone who listens, and especially the people I forget to shout out. Uh, we get a few new listeners every once in a while. Dave, there's a bunch of Daves that listen. I don't know which one. The one that Ryan. Well, Josh, I'm going to kick it to you, so you can call these people out. Yeah, it's just y'all appreciate you listening. I don't think of everybody, and almost every time, as soon as we hit the stop record button, I'm like, oh dang, I didn't shout that dude out. So appreciate y'all commenting, man. It's great. I appreciate Rodney sending that text. That was kind of fun. If y'all have something that just kind of a minor annoyance that really just gets under your skin, man, maybe we'll address that at the end of every episode. But thanks for listening. All the people that Roger wants to shout out, his Apache Junction folks. Thanks for listening. So, Josh, with that, I'll kick it to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I always, always tell myself, I'm like, I need to write down my shout outs because I can't remember them all. And then I forget to write them down. So maybe some people find that annoying that I forget to shout them out. I don't know. So yeah, like you said, the usual suspects, Wes out in Colorado, John up in the NCR, Rodney up in Alaska, and everybody else. We definitely appreciate you listening. As Luke often says, the most valuable thing you can give us is your time, and we definitely appreciate you guys joining us and supporting us. And Dave and Ryan and some others, you guys hit us up on social media. We definitely appreciate that. Do us a favor, keep doing that. And if you want to hear our thoughts on something, like Dave, man, throw it up on our social media, and and we'll roll it around. I do think that we should take a deep dive on the reparations thing, and really dig into it, not just hit the wave tops as we often do with a lot of subjects, but really get in the weeds with it. And a couple other things, but yeah, I definitely want to have the discussion, on the nature of God, and talk about that. I had a pretty good conversation with a mutual friend of ours here a couple months ago, and about that very thing, and it was very very good. So we'll save that one when Roger has better internet. So until then, we will talk to you guys later. We'll see you guys later. Hit us up on social media. Keep those canteen cups full and tightly secured.